you also had the opportunity to go back and visit. And one of the things that you did visit was the New York Times bureau chief's home. So, successive New York Times bureau chiefs have lived on top of your family's home in Jerusalem, where you were displaced from in 1948. And I think it started with Thomas Friedman. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Um, but it's such, I mean, you speak of outrage. This is such one among many, so many outrageous stories. So I was curious if you could describe that to our audience. I'm not sure if our audience is familiar with the fact that the New York Times basically houses its bureau chief on top of your ethnically cleansed home in Jerusalem. And I also kind of wanted to take that into talking a bit about the media coverage of Palestine, because I think just that story, your own story alone, says so much about the way the corporate media covers this issue.
Yes, because look, never mind the audience not being aware of the bureau chief of the New York Times living on top of my house. I was not aware. How on earth would I have known? We left our house in 1948, never saw it again, and it in the meantime, unknown to us, of course, because we were absent. Um, the New York Times somebody had built an upper floor on top of our house. Now our house was a typical Jerusalem villa in that area in West Jerusalem, where there are no upper floors. However, somebody at some point, some Israeli owner of our house, had built a floor above the main house, and that floor, which was an apartment, was leased to the New York Times in the early 1980s. And from that moment on, the New York Times housed its bureau chiefs in that apartment. Now, I found all this out when one day I was working in Ramallah. I was working for the Palestinian Authority, and I received an email from this person whom I knew nothing about, who said, "Look, I have a fee. I'm sorry about if I can approach you, but I've been reading your book In Search of Fatima, which is of course my memoir, and this man said, I've come to the conclusion that I think I'm living above your old house." Um, and he said, extended an invitation to me. He said, "Would you like to come and perhaps I could show you around the house?" And I couldn't resist. There was no way I could have resisted. I was extremely anxious to go, and I did. I went, and I met this man who is still active today. I think he's based in Berlin. He's called Stephen Erlanger, and he was the bureau chief of the New York Times at that moment. And I met him. He was very welcoming, very polite, very pleasant. Um, and I looked at the house. It was our house. And there was a way you went up above the main house into this apartment, which is where he lived. And it it was all it was all quite civilized and uh, pleasant and so on. And then there came a moment. I looked at him and I thought, he'd read my memoir. He had worked out that he was living above my house when our family, which belongs to us but does not belong to the people who currently lived there. So I couldn't resist. I said to him, "Listen, I can see that you are very knowledgeable and you're now informed and you've read my book, and you must know very well that you are living in my house because I'm not living there, frankly. You know, now knowing what you know, how do you feel about Israel? What makes what goes through your mind? And he got into a terrible difficulty and hummed and hawed and was evasive and and cleared his throat and oh dear, and he absolutely was unable to deal with the question. So it was I mean, there was more in which I pressed my point, and I said, but why would why would you, knowing what you know, how can you go on thinking in the way that you do and writing in the way that you do? Now, he could not have an answer. He did not have an answer. He had the grace to be embarrassed, that I could see, but he didn't take it any further into apologizing, saying how sorry he was, or you know. And you're very right, to point out to the significance of this story in the sense that it explains quite how the media um, covers or does not cover, in fact, the story of the Palestinians. It glosses over all this stuff. It presents Israel, particularly liberal type Israelis, in an attractive light, and it doesn't really will not tell the truth about what happened. And that day he introduced me to the people who could own the house now. An Israeli, liberal Israeli family, very courteous again, and rather apologetic, I thought, sort of saying, well, can we show you around your own house? But no, they didn't say that. They said, please feel free to go in all around the house. Um, and, everyone completely oblivious to how I might feel, what memories it might have stirred in me, and they didn't have the decency to at least get out of the house that evening and allow me a few moments on my own. So that sort of insensitivity, cloaked by a liberal seeming um, pleasantries, liberal seeming pleasantries about everybody being civilized. This is the kind of stuff that I assure you, Rania, I, I hate more, even more than the crude right wing Likud type, in your face brutality. I prefer that to this hypocrisy, play acting, dishonesty, which I saw that evening.
I mean, that's just such an insane story. Like I'm trying to put myself in your shoes here, and I can't believe you were able to maintain your composure. Um, I'm sure you didn't have a choice. I mean, you're surrounded by people. Like, what are you going to do in that situation other than, I guess, like politely challenge and then smile and nod? But wow, it's also just so shocking.